it? Very nice to see you. Thank you very much for receiving us. Well, it's weird to be at a closing party, but still, it's worth it. So thank you very much. Goedendag. Secretary General, very good to see you again. How are you? Thank you very much. Very good to have you here. Now in the new capacity. Good to see you again. Since yesterday, how are you? Good to see you again. Happy to see you again. No. All friends.
Please be seated. Your Majesty, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, good afternoon and welcome. Dobrodošli, bienvenue. My name's Kate McIntosh. I have the honour to be the last Deputy Registrar of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. I'm delighted to welcome you here in the Hall of Knights for the official closing ceremony of the International Tribunal after 24 years of making history. It is a tremendous honour to welcome His Majesty King Willem-Alexander of the Netherlands and United Nations Secretary-General, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, who have graced us with their presence here today. Among our most distinguished guests, I also welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency Mr. Halbe Zijkstra, to whom I extend our gratitude for hosting this event in these truly exceptional premises. Her Excellency, Mrs. Pauline Krikke, Mayor of the City of The Hague, and the distinguished principals of our tribunal. To begin our ceremony here today, please rise and join me in observing 1 minute of silence in memory of the victims of the conflicts in the former Yugoslavia. Thank you. I would now like to invite to the stage His Excellency Judge Kamel Ajus, President of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia.
Your Majesty, King Willem-Alexander, United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, Excellencies, distinguished guests, victims' representatives, staff members, friends of the ICTY, and all of those watching today's closing ceremony as it is transmitted live. Sometimes, in the course of history, decisive action by the international community sparks movements for change. The ICTY stands out as a shining example. Its creation was a resounding expression of the common resolve to fight against impunity and for humanity. Certainly, we were created as an ad hoc tribunal, non-permanent, with jurisdiction over those most responsible for committing atrocities in the former Yugoslavia, and with a mandate to bring justice, peace, and security to one particular region of the world. However, despite our limited raison d'être, the achievements of the past 24 years show us something different. They point to the universality of our tribunal. Against all odds and in defiance of expectations, the ICTY evolved into a body that enunciated universal standards, distilled internationally accepted norms, developed best practice after best practice, and demonstrated that impunity can be overcome. More importantly, it became an inspiration throughout the world. And indeed, the movement that was initiated a quarter of a century ago has transformed into an expectation that war criminals can, must, and will be brought to justice. Since then, accountability for atrocities has crystallized into a universal value, which will continue to shape the fight for justice in the future. Just think about how far we have already come since 1993. The ICTY ushered in a new era, indeed a new paradigm in international criminal justice, and its legacy will outlast every single one of us here today. The ICTY has not been alone in this success. Many partners and donors are here today. Others were unfortunately not able to join us, but are, of course, no less appreciated. On behalf of the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, all its principals, judges, and staff members past and present, I wish to convey my warmest and deepest gratitude to all those who have brought us to this moment. And we commemorate the closing and legacy of the ICTY. In particular, I express the Tribunal's sincere thanks to the outstanding hospitality of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, including, of course, this magnificent city of The Hague. You have extended every generosity from the day you first welcomed us into our premises, through to hosting our final ceremony here in this immensely significant and historic building, the Ridderzaal. We are proud that, due in part to the ICTY's experience, The Hague is now renowned as the final destination of international justice, the place that symbolizes the ultimate wish of victims everywhere to see justice done. It must be acknowledged that the successes of the ICTY are the successes of the United Nations as a whole. We are honored to have the United Nations Secretary General join us today in recognition of the ICTY's accomplishments, and as we close the tribunal, we can feel secure in the knowledge that he will continue to lead the United Nations towards a more perfect realization of the ideals for which we all stand. I am equally comforted that we conclude with a capable successor body in place, namely the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals. Today, 21st December, marks the winter solstice, which throughout the ages has served as an occasion to gather together and mark the closing of an old chapter while preparing for the new. This afternoon, the sun will slowly set as our closing ceremony comes to an end. On 31st December, it will set on the ICTY for the final time. Today may be the shortest day of this year, but it will remain one of the most memorable as we take the opportunity to reflect, stand united, and look to the future. My own wish is that the spirit of goodwill that was encapsulated by the community of nations way back in 1993, when the tribunal was established, will be rekindled and will endure long after its closure. I thank you all once more for your attendance and for all your support. Thank you.
Thank you, President, for those stirring words. I'd now like to invite to the stage His Excellency Mr. Halbe Zijkstra, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Your Majesty, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the closing of this tribunal takes me back to the beginning of the war. News reports brought horrific images into our homes. One, in particular, is imprinted in my memory. A row of men being held behind a barbed wire fence, some of them extremely thin. Fear and desperation in their eyes. It was beyond belief. It shocked the world. And here, at the heart of Europe, after the so-called end of history, cities were being destroyed, towns razed, and villages wiped out. People were being tortured. Peace and justice seemed so far away. And it was clear that we could not close our eyes to the horrible things men were, again, doing to other men. Back then, few could imagine there would ever be justice and accountability. 25 years later, those responsible have indeed been held accountable. And that shows us something really important. Justice may not be swift, but if we are patient and determined, justice will be done. The story of this tribunal is one of legal success that emerged from a true tragedy. And so, while this is certainly a remarkable occasion, it is also touched by sadness. We are here to mark the conclusion of the tribunal and celebrate its achievements. And there were many. It was a unique court, unique in indicting a head of state, unique in its case law, unique in convicting so many people accused of atrocity crimes and of sexual violence in wartime. Speaking for the tribunal's host country, I must say we can look back on 24 years of excellent cooperation. And I would like to thank everyone who made this possible, from principals to police officers, from clerks to security personnel, judges, prosecutors, and defense lawyers. You were all united in one purpose: to make this work. And after almost a quarter of a century, you have created an incredible legal legacy. At times, you must have felt like pioneers, exploring uncharted territories of international criminal law. Like all pioneers, you must have felt lonely. After all, in the early years, few people believed this would really work. In fact, many were highly skeptical. At best, they said, the tribunal would try only the small fry. A court set up while the war was still going on? How would that even work? The first employees, they were advised against buying property in the Netherlands. The tribunal wouldn't last for long. Well, you proved the skeptics wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, my country had the privilege to be your host nation. And we will, of course, remain the host of the MICT, and we look forward to continuing our partnership with them. I hope the great work of the ICTY will serve as an inspiration to many other institutions present here. After all, the words of Registrar John Hocking, and I quote, "The ICTY has created a world in which we all demand and expect justice," those words are very true. Because this tribunal has shown us, yes, justice is hardly ever swift. But in the end, justice will be done. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the important legacy of this tribunal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, for your very thoughtful remarks. I would now like to invite to the stage Her Excellency Mrs. Pauline Krikke, Mayor of the City of The Hague.
Your Majesty, Mr. Secretary General, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. She could have been one of our neighbors, a 9-year-old girl. She was tired of being kept indoors all the time. Indoors, in the flat in the besieged Sarajevo. In the end, her parents gave in to her pleading. Sitbilla was finally allowed to play outside again. It was 25th of June, 1995, and together with her young friends, she was outside skipping, enjoying the fresh air and having fun. A few minutes later, a Serb grenade exploded in a playground, ending the life of Sitbilla and her 3 playmates. You ask yourself, when you hear such a story, who could have fired that grenade? We will probably never know. But we do know who held political and military responsibility for the siege of Sarajevo, Karadzic and Mladic. Both have been convicted by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Stories like these bring the madness of war closer at home. A madness which erupted in the early 1990s. In a Europe that had been free of the horrors of war since 1945. The places which many Europeans knew from sun-drenched holidays, the most terrible things were being done there then. On top of which, we saw a large part of it with our own eyes, on television. But unlike the many previous violations of human rights, this time the perpetrators did not get away with it. They were called to account. We consider it a great honor that this happened here, in our city, The Hague. The ICTY has written history in The Hague. It has pronounced judgment and giving the victims something that had been taken from them, a voice. We must never forget that this is about crimes against individuals, sometimes in large groups, but victims are always people, men, women, and children. Children like that 9-year-old girl who only wanted to play outside for a while. With the arrival of the ICTY, our International City of Peace and Justice also evolved into a center for international criminal law, where knowledge and practical experience come together. Something that will continue in the future too, of course. Let the convictions of the ICTY also be a warning to everyone, wherever they may be in the world, a warning to all those who think they can trample human rights underfoot. They can no longer get away with it. The Hague is, and always will be, a place where victims of power-driven violence can find justice. In the interest of justice and in the interest of peace, because there can be no peace without justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, for that heartfelt tribute. I would now like to invite His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, to deliver his keynote address.
Your Majesty,
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to be here today to commemorate the closing of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. And I wish to express my gratitude to His Majesty and the Government of the Netherlands for hosting us in this beautiful and historic Hall of Knights. And I also thank the Netherlands and the City of The Hague for the excellent partnership for the past 24 years in enabling the Tribunal to fulfill its important mandate and for their continuing support to many other international courts and tribunals. The creation of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in 1993 was a groundbreaking moment. It had been close to half a century since the Nuremberg and Tokyo war crimes trials. The 1948 Genocide Convention entered into force in 1951, but no international criminal tribunal that would recognize individual criminal responsibility for such a crime had yet been established. By voting unanimously for the creation of the first ever criminal tribunal within the United Nations, the Security Council noted that it was convinced that it would contribute to the restoration and maintenance of peace, thereby highlighting the close links between international criminal justice and the organization's core mission. I would sincerely like that this feeling would remain today. The creation of this tribunal demonstrated a newfound and serious commitment by the international community that those responsible for perpetrating the most serious crimes of international concern should be held accountable for their actions. The tribunal sat for more than 10,000 days of trial and heard testimony from nearly 5,000 people. 90 individuals were sentenced for their crimes, including genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. And beyond those numbers, the tribunal gave a voice to victims. People who had experienced atrocious violence and tragic losses, including women and girls, were given the opportunity to tell their stories in court, to place their experiences on the record, and to see the perpetrators of crimes against them held accountable. This in itself has contributed to the healing process. Reliving such horrors takes tremendous fortitude. I salute the courage of all those who came to the tribunal to guarantee that justice could be served. And it is because of these witnesses that the tribunal leaves behind one of its most important legacies, the immense archives documenting what happened in Sarajevo, Foča, Vukovar, Suva Reka, Srebrenica, and elsewhere. These records ensure that the world will not forget, that history cannot be rewritten, and that the victims' voices will continue to resound down the decades. Ladies and gentlemen, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia has been a pioneer in creating the contemporary architecture of international criminal justice. The Tribunal has pushed international expectations of accountability beyond what was anticipated in 1993, transforming how we speak about and address situations in which serious international crimes are committed. Today, it's common practice for the United Nations Security Council to call for the perpetrators of atrocities to be held accountable. We see this too in the statements of heads of state, in the work of journalists, in the efforts of national courts, and in public opinion. Accountability has taken root in our collective consciousness. And since the establishment of the tribunal, we have seen a flourishing of entities established to ensure accountability, including the International Criminal Court for Rwanda, the Special Court for Sierra Leone, the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia, the Special Tribunal for Lebanon, and of course, the International Criminal Court. Indeed, without the United Nations tribunals for Yugoslavia and Rwanda, there might never have been a permanent international criminal court, the central institution of the international criminal justice system today. At the national level, the work of the former International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia inspired the establishment of the War Crimes Chamber in the State Court of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which has been working since 2005 to conduct war crimes trials according to international standards. The transfer of investigation files to national authorities, the referral of cases to the national courts, and the ongoing provision of evidence and assistance to enable them to prosecute the crimes that took place in the conflict of the 90s is a significant part of the Tribunal's legacy. And the Tribunal also helped to inspire prosecutions and trials for international crimes at the domestic level. The United Nations will continue to support national authorities and civil society in this work. While these developments are to be praised, we know that the cause of criminal justice is a long-term undertaking, and we must remain attentive and resolute. I'm confident that with the support of the international community, international criminal justice will continue to develop, and more countries where atrocities were committed will initiate or continue prosecutions in their own courts. But the future is not only the fight against impunity, it is also the pursuit of truth and reconciliation. The Spanish writer Juan Goytisolo reported in 1993 the existence of memoricide, erasing the past, for example, through the destruction of the Library of Sarajevo. The Tribunal has led the way in establishing the criminalization of attacks against cultural property under international law. And I'd also like to recognize the outreach program, which sought to bring the Tribunal's proceedings closer to the affected people, communities, and national authorities. In 2009, in my capacity as High Commissioner for Refugees, I visited the Potokari Memorial in Srebrenica to pay my respects. That genocide will continue to haunt the global conscience. Just as the whole international community, including the United Nations, has had to acknowledge their share of responsibility for the massacre, so must the various communities of the former Yugoslavia build on the legacy of the Tribunal and deepen their efforts towards trust and full reconciliation. Accepting the undeniable truths and facts of past tragedies is crucial for building a better and common future. Mesdames et Messieurs, the Tribunal Pénal.
Ladies and gentlemen, the ICTY would not have been able to work without the continuous support of the member states, the international institutions, and the civil society. The tribunal will now be closing its doors, but we still have a lot to do. The international community should continue to ask to bring to trial perpetrators of serious crimes and to render justice to the victims. This is the reason why the ceremony organized today, focusing on the legacy of the court, is so important. The Latin word legatus means ambassador or envoy. It is up to us as of now to be the ambassadors of the memory of people and to make known the fact that the tragedies which took place in former Yugoslavia should never be forgotten. We all must be considered as ambassadors of human rights, of the rule of law and justice. With this in mind, I would like to pay tribute to all those who have served the tribunal and helped the court move forward, and they are the heirs of an important legacy which we should all preserve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary-General, for your inspiring words. Merci. We will now have a musical interlude from Handel's oratorio Solomon, based on the famous biblical story in which King Solomon must decide which of two women is the true mother of an infant child. In Handel's piece, the trial itself and Solomon's verdict, in which he speaks the famous words, "Divide the babe," is preceded by a trio. The first woman, who turns out to be the real mother, desperately expresses her fear of losing her baby. She begs for justice to be on her side. The other woman, who's lost her own baby, accuses the first of falsehood. King Solomon, the judge, presents the scales of justice fully in balance in the background. Allow me to introduce the musicians who will play this trio for us today. We will have Elizabeth Perry on violin, Michiel Holtrop on viola, Edwin Bleichrodt on cello, David Janssen on harpsichord, Lisbeth van der Loop, mezzo-soprano, as the first woman, Marieke Verbeek, soprano, as the second woman, and our very own judge, Fons Ori, baritone, as King Solomon. Thank you. I would now like to invite to the stage Mr. Serge Brammertz, prosecutor of the ICTY and of the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals.
Your Majesty, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, dear friends. When asked about the legacy of the ICTY, I often reply that it really looks different depending on the perspective you adopt. Those who were present when the tribunal was created in 1993 will say that there were serious doubts at that time whether we could achieve any significant results. Yet, we are closing our doors, having secured convictions of 90 war criminals, including senior leaders from all parties to the conflict. My office investigated these crimes and proved that many were committed as part of horrific ethnic cleansing campaigns. We held generals responsible for attacking civilian populations, camp commanders for brutal crimes against detainees, and political leaders for using the bureaucratic machinery to persecute hundreds of thousands. We also established beyond reasonable doubt that genocide was committed in Srebrenica in July 1995, and 16 individuals were convicted for those crimes. This is a credible record that exceeds even the most optimistic expectations. Similarly, key legal concepts were developed in the tribunal's cases. Crimes against humanity are recognized as widespread or systematic attacks against civilians that shock our collective conscience. Rape is no longer seen as something that just happens in conflict, but as a weapon of war to destroy lives that we call conflict-related sexual violence. Political and military leaders can bear command responsibility for the crimes committed by their subordinates, or be held responsible for participating in joint criminal enterprises to commit campaigns of crimes. Perhaps most of all, the tribunal's legacy can be seen in our collective response to atrocity crimes, as already mentioned by the Secretary General. Today, the United Nations and the international community recognize that transitional justice is an essential element in peace building and conflict prevention. Peace agreements that used to grant immunity incorporate justice mechanisms. The public rightfully expects to see those responsible for mass atrocities prosecuted and not treated as responsible interlocutors. This evolution in attitude is among the most significant developments in international affairs over the last 2 decades. None of this to say that the tribunal is without legitimate criticism. Some cases took long to finish, and some high-profile cases had unexpected outcomes. And we must ask ourselves whether we were always sufficiently focused on the affected communities we serve and met their expectations. But the fact remains that the tribunal accomplished a great deal over the last 24 years. Yet, while it is important to consider the tribunal in the past, we must also look at it in the present and the future. A few weeks ago, the tribunal delivered its final judgments. The reactions, particularly in the former Yugoslavia, were as strong as ever, and many dynamics remain the same today. Victims and survivors were grateful for the tribunal's work and the recognition of the crimes they suffered. They were the tribunal's strongest supporters, and it was thanks to their courage and determination that we were able to carry out our mandate. I would like, again, today to pay tribute to them, and I'm very, very pleased that a number of victims' representatives are with us today. It's because of you that the tribunal was set up, and you have always reminded us what our duty and our job is. So really thank you for your presence. Yet many politicians rejected and condemned the judgments, refusing to accept uncomfortable facts. Throughout the region, convicted war criminals are seen as heroes, while victims are ignored. Ethnic cleansing and genocide are still officially denied. The rule of law is contested and reconciliation is often overwhelmed by the rhetoric of ethnic nationalism. From the perspective of the present, then, the tribunal and its work are very relevant to today's challenges. And while the tribunal is closing, its work must continue. That is an important perspective from which we can think about the future. Many victims from all communities are still waiting for justice. And thousands of families do not know until today the fate of their loved ones. Victims and survivors are unanimous that accountability must continue. So what the tribunal started remains essential to them. National prosecutors and judges in the region have become the tribunal's closest partners over the last decade. Together, we established an integrated collaborative approach to promote greater accountability. Now, they are fully responsible for continuing our work. Thousands of suspects must still be investigated. Hundreds of complex cases involving senior and mid-level suspects will need to be prosecuted in national courts in every country. Regional judicial cooperation must be improved so that perpetrators no longer enjoy safe haven in neighbor countries. For our national colleagues, continued support from the mechanism and from international partners will be of decisive importance. And as I said, we are extremely pleased to have victims' representatives, but I'm also very pleased to see a number of prosecutors, a number of chief prosecutors from the countries of the former Yugoslavia. I hope you will see the support you are getting, and I can assure you that you will get the support of the mechanism and its prosecutor. Politicians and officials from the region have been more often opponents of the tribunal than supporters. The reality is that atrocities were committed in the former Yugoslavia because senior leaders thought power using fear, lies, and hate. State sovereignty was then invoked to hinder investigations and protect wanted fugitives. Today, leaders are at an important crossroads. They must distance themselves from the crimes, reject convicted war criminals, and stop hiding behind false claims of collective guilt. I've said it many times before, but let me repeat, the tribunal judged the guilt of individuals, not peoples. If there is the political courage, our judgments can lift the weight of collective guilt, help communities accept the immense wrongdoings of the past, and promote reconciliation. European integration requires a decisive break from the rhetoric and mindset of the past. Political leaders in the region can put European values into practice by providing real support to justice, not just the minimum necessary for appearances. Finally, the United Nations, the Security Council, and the international community made the tribunal and everything we accomplished possible. As the ICTY showed, if there is a consistent diplomatic agenda, justice can be achieved even for the most horrific atrocities. Yet it seems today as if there are more conflicts and more crimes around the world than in recent memory. The need for justice is immense, but so are the political barriers. As these challenges are navigated, the tribunal's lessons will be vital. So as we mark the closure of the ISTY, all of us can rededicate ourselves to advancing justice for atrocity crimes in the future, in the Western Balkans and globally. As the ISTY has shown, justice is a key element in our global order and the work of the United Nations. Thank you again for your support to our work, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Prosecutor. And I invite Mr. John Hocking, ICTY Registrar, to address us.
Your Majesty, Mr. Secretary General, Your Honours, distinguished guests, the ICTY set the bar. Now let us raise it higher. Let us demand justice where it is still denied, where it seems impossible. After the ICTY, we can and we must. When the ICTY started, war was still raging in the Balkans. Justice from a tribunal that had no staff, no rules and no accused was an improbable hope. Yet accused after accused, leader after leader, eventually saw their day in court, until there were no fugitives left, and justice had become a reality. For the ICTY, justice is no longer a question of if, it is a question of when and how. The ICTY set the bar, now let us raise it higher. Let us speak up when humanity is targeted. 5,000 witnesses told their story at the ICTY. The boy who crawled over dead bodies. The girl who was raped over and over. The woman who was not worth treating. They spoke up about the unspeakable and made justice possible. Today, Rohingya women fight through the same shame and pain to tell their stories because they need justice. If they can, we too must find our own voice and speak up. Let us treat every person with humanity. The ICTY set the bar and treated persons accused or convicted of the most inhumane acts with the same humanity which is owed to all human beings. And by respecting human dignity when it is most difficult, we raise higher the respect of human rights for us all. After the ICTY, we can raise the bar higher. Today, we don't have to start from scratch again. Today, it is no longer revolutionary that rape can be an act of genocide and that heads of state can stand trial. Today, there is no longer one ad hoc tribunal in The Hague. Today, there is an entire world building on what the ICTY has achieved. In The Hague and in New York, in the capitals and in the villages, with a gavel or with a phone, international and domestic courts, member states, NGOs, and all of us work towards justice. With each judgment rendered, each victim supported, and each child educated, we raise the bar higher for justice every day. But despite our efforts, monuments still turn into rubble and bodies into corpses. Condemned war criminals are hailed as heroes, and documented atrocities are denied or downplayed. And when it feels as if we've made no progress, we've learned no lessons, and we are no better than we were before, we must remember that justice is not an event, it is a process. The deeper the wounds, the greater the challenge. The greater the urgency, the bigger the risk to expect too much too soon. On this winding uphill path, we must always remember that every effort has value and every step raises the bar higher. This past 11 July, I was in Srebrenica one last time as the ICTY registrar. In the crowd, together with the mothers of Srebrenica, was a group of Yazidis. Armed with the resilience of those who have lost it all, the mothers of Srebrenica made the world care. Genocide was recognised, and from excavating mass graves, bone by bone, almost all the victims have been identified. Today, the mothers of Srebrenica tell the Yazidis, and all of us, that a judicial process is the way forward. In the words of one of them, you cannot bring back the dead, but you can feel the justice. The ICTY set the bar. It delivered justice for the murdered, the raped and the displaced in the former Yugoslavia. But millions more are being murdered, raped and displaced in villages that now stand out on the map and in villages already wiped off the map. for them, and for all of humanity, it is now up to all of us to raise the bar even higher. Thank you.
Thank you, Registrar. I would now like to invite Ms. Marie O'Leary, Vice President of the Association of Defence Counsel practising before international tribunals.
Thank you. Your Majesty, Mr. Secretary General, Mr. President, Excellencies, and distinguished guests. I have the distinct honor of appearing here today on behalf of the Association of Defence Counsel, practicing before international courts and tribunals, not only on behalf of its president and its membership, but also on behalf of the entire defense community who has worked tirelessly in cases before the ICTY for over 2 decades. As with all parts of this tribunal, the defense community is made up of interesting souls from far-flung parts of the universe, doing difficult work and, of course, under deadline. But with the role of international criminal defense, there are unique aspects to the work. In particular, as Clarence Darrow described once, that few love a spokesman for the despised and the damned. But when the ICTY opened its doors over 20 years ago, it was based on a statute that chose to include the work of criminal defense and afford certain rights to those who would be charged. It called for defendants to appear before it to have representation to fulfill the task of criminal defense on an epic level. It also contained Article 21(1). All persons shall be equal before the International Tribunal. It falls under the title of Rights of the Accused, but the simplicity and starkness of the statement has a quality of defining an egalitarianism to be addressed in all. It reads not only that defendants will be treated equally in the proceedings, but it demands an equality of arms in that all persons, no matter what cause they are bringing before the court, would be heard equally by the judges charged with the difficult task of fact-finding in these cases. The statute also called for all defendants to be presumed innocent before a final determination in the case. And no matter how grave the allegations, no matter how graphic the harm, the proceedings would take place to sort fact from fiction and make findings of guilt only when found beyond a reasonable doubt. So while the inevitable conversations faced by defense counsel before ICTY that always included the phrase, "How can you defend these people?" may have given the questioned person renewed introspect, the conclusion, supported by the founding texts, is the reminder that the work done was to advance the human rights of those who stand charged of crimes at the highest levels, rightly or wrongly. And every motion, every argument, every brief along the way helped build the rule of law and a system that is respected and referenced in courts all over the world today. The group of persons willing to undertake this difficult task of defense at the ICTY was neither small nor inconsequential. It has consisted of over 420 defense counsel assignments, with approximately a third of these persons being assigned to more than one case in the life of the tribunal. They were assisted by a body of eager young minds, some 650 legal assistants, case managers, and interpreters, some of them who were professionally raised in this system. Quite striking is the number of persons who are willing to do this work completely gratis in the 1,600 legal interns who have assisted the defense teams along the way. And at the heart of it all is the ADC ICT. And when I type up notes like this, or I write it, I still continue to write ADC ICTY, because at the end of that acronym, ADC ICTY, was only changed earlier this year, in that it has made the name change to reflect the scope of its work in light of the closing of this tribunal. However, it should not be lost in these significant moments that this was a body of practitioners and the sole creation of this body of counsel to unify defense practitioners before the ICTY, to share experiences, to associate, to self-regulate an emerging niche of a profession. Created in 2002, the Association of Defense Counsel practicing before the ICTY as it was, created a community that is as strong as ever today. Now coined ADC ICT, it continues its work with the MICT, a testament to its own legacy and the role that it played within the ICTY. It is equally significant that we are granted this opportunity to contribute today, as such position may not have even been thought of in the earliest days of the tribunal. It is oft repeated by those who were there in those first days that defense counsel did not have access to the library, the canteen, or even a copier. So to stand before you today to assist in formally closing this renowned institution as defense, as a recognized part of the process, a party to the proceedings, officers of the court, and contributors to justice, is overwhelming. But the time has come when we as a defense community must also close a chapter. Whenever I pass by the ICTY on the President Kennedy's lawn side, I guide my eyes up to the defense rooms and check to see if the lights are on. They have always been on. And in that, I know there's a small reassurance that someone, likely several someones, are there working diligently to assist their clients and advance issues that have sparked conversation and litigation that has helped to shape the contours of how we should define crimes and international criminal responsibility for individuals and justice in modern conflicts. The thought of that light going out brings a bit of sadness. But we can be reassured to know that those who keep it lit in the defense hallway before the ICTY not only contributed to the rights of the accused and the legacy of that tribunal and its work, but to this very day, this very moment, somewhere in the world, that light is kept on as they continue the legacy to assure that the human rights of defendants are preserved in all judicial proceedings, at all levels and everywhere. And I thank you for recognizing that the legacy of the defense in today's memory, and for all of your careful attention, dear audience.
Thank you, Ms. O'Leary. Finally, I would like to invite to the stage Judge Theodore Meron, President of the International Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals.
Your Majesty, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, friends, distinguished guests, justice, accountability, the rule of law, human dignity. These are principles that figure among our noblest and highest ideals, and our commitment to them is reflected in your presence in this august meeting and session today. But while our commitment to these ideals is without question, I would ask us all to pause today and to reflect on why it is that they matter. Justice, I submit, matters because it is by pursuing accountability through independent and impartial adjudication that we cement respect for the rule of law, and by doing so, build the bricks that lead us on pathways towards peace. Justice matters because it is through judicial proceedings that we defend and demand adherence to the values embodied in our laws, laws that reflect in many ways our better selves, that denounce cruelty and malice, and that at the international level reflect the fundamental expectation that even in the heart of armed conflicts, we shall be guided by and shall protect basic humanity. Justice matters because at its core, it represents a profound acknowledgement of human dignity, of the importance of every life, of sharing the pain of the victims, and of the responsibility we have for one another. And I'm so happy that my friend Munira, the iconic mother of Srebrenica, is gracing us with her presence today. In everyday life, we may not reflect a great deal upon the value of justice, of accountability, or of the rule of law. But it is when we stand aggrieved, when we watch loved ones taken away on trains and trucks, never to return. When we bear witness to brutality and barbarism, or bear such brutality and barbarism ourselves, that is when we are most keenly aware of the value of justice. And it is when we endeavor to rebuild our lives and our communities in the wake of devastating violence, when we strive together to bring about lasting peace, that we are most aware of the crucial bedrock that justice provides. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia was born of a compelling demand for justice and accountability. And from the moment of its founding in 1993, the tribunal was a true pioneer, blazing a trail for all of the other accountability efforts that would follow in the intervening years. In case after case, the tribunal clarified the contours of international humanitarian and human rights law, reinforced the respect for the rule of law, and made plain that no one stands above it. In case after case, the tribunal demonstrated the singular importance of fairness and due process. And in case after case, the tribunal brought into sharp and terrible relief atrocities committed across the region of the former Yugoslavia. As it prepares to close its doors, the tribunal leaves a proud legacy indeed. But while we are marking the completion of the ICTY's mandate, we are not marking an end. Important work still remains, for justice requires a sustained commitment long after trials and appeals have concluded. It requires the protection of vulnerable victims and witnesses, and the supervision of the sentences of those individuals who were convicted, be assured. It requires that a judicial forum be provided to address remaining appeals, requests for review, allegations of contempt, and other matters arising out of the tribunal's cases, and to ensure normative continuity. And it requires a commitment to supporting vital accountability efforts in national jurisdictions, and to preserving and providing access to the unparalleled collection of testimony and other evidence in the archives of the tribunal. Justice requires that these obligations be met, and it falls to the international residual mechanism for criminal tribunals as the successor of both the ICTY and the ICTR to preserve the vital progress that the ICTY has made in the fight to end impunity for international crimes, to carry out and conclude the remaining cases and other functions I have just outlined, and to do all of this while serving as a careful steward of the resources entrusted to it and seeking ever more efficient and effective ways of completing its mandate. The mechanism, no less than the ICTY, reflects an abiding commitment to justice. As we gather here today in the city of peace and justice, graced by the presence of His Majesty and other representatives of our host, whose dedication to international justice has sustained the work of the ICTY for decades, we are marking in many ways a passing of the proverbial torch. But it is not simply for the residual mechanism to take up the torch so long held aloft by the tribunal. It is, I would submit, for each of us to do so. Let justice be done, let the world should perish. This was the principle brilliantly articulated by Hegel that underlies and has always underlined the creation of the ICTY. And this is the principle that must continue to guide us, all of us today, and I thank you.
Thank you, President Meron. I now have the honor to present to you the award-winning Serbian actress, Ms. Mirjana Karanovic, who will read excerpts from the testimony of different victims before the tribunal. After Ms. Karanovic's readings, we will have a short video tribute on the monitors. Ms. Karanovic.
I begged them to leave me the pictures of my children because it's something I could remember them by. But they didn't want to listen. They took away everything, even the photos of my daughter's graduation. It may not be a very important thing in life, but for me, a part of my life has been erased because I don't have a picture of my child when he was small. I'm sorry I'm crying. It doesn't weigh much, perhaps, on the scale of everything that happened, but it's something that's important to many people, and it's important to me. Minka Čehić and her husband, Muhamed Čehić, were living in Prijedor, located in northwest Bosnia and Herzegovina, when Serb forces took control of the town on 30th April 92. On the 23rd of May 1992, Muhamed Čehić was taken from his home to the police station for questioning. He was later transferred to Omarska camp. Minka Čehić never saw her husband again. Months later, a letter reached her, written by Muhamed Čehić during his incarceration. Minka Čehić read out the letter in the tribunal's courtroom during her testimony in 2002. My dear Minka, I'm writing this letter, not at all sure that it will ever reach you. Still, I feel the irresistible need to talk to you, at least this way. Since my departure on that 23rd of May, when they came to our home to get me, I have been living like in another world. It's inconceivable for me, all this that's happening to us. Could life really be so unpredictable and so cruel? I remember how this time last year we were so looking forward to the building of our house, and now look where we are. I feel so empty. I feel as if I'd never been alive. I'm trying to fight it. I'm trying to resist it by remembering everything that was beautiful with you and the children and all those that I love. That's all for this time, because I really don't have the strength to write anymore. Give my love to all who ask about me. And to you and to the children, I love you very, very much. At the end of her testimony, Minka Čehić thanked the court and said, I also wish to ask you to take my testimony into consideration in a genuine and impartial way, to judge who contributed and how much to what has happened. Those who bear no guilt, free them. But whoever is guilty must suffer the consequences of what he has done. I used to be a woman who lived for one man only, and I was his all my life. And I think that I was just getting separated from my body at that time. He trampled on my pride, and I will never be able to be the woman that I used to be. Before the war broke out in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Grozdana Čečić, a 43-year-old Serb wife, mother, and shop owner, was living in Donje Selo, a village close to the town of Konjic in central Bosnia. On 27 May 1992, Grozdana Čečić was captured and taken to the Čelebići prison camp set up by the forces of Bosnian Muslims and Bosnian Croats, where she was repeatedly raped. Grozdana Čečić testified before the tribunal in March 1997 as follows. I couldn't do anything. I was just lying there while he was raping me. I had no way of defending myself. I couldn't understand what was going on, what was happening to me. I was crying. I said, "Oh, Mother, what have I come to live through?" I was completely beside myself. To trample on a woman's pride like that. Then after, when I was left alone, I cried, and then I said, how on earth can I now go back to my husband, my children, and my family? The first bullets were fired in my direction. It was uninterrupted fire, directed towards my side by one of them, while another one directed his fire to the other side of the sofa. I was not wounded then. The fire stopped for a short time, then a burst of fire came from the opposite direction, from the left, and I was shot first in my leg and then in the knee. Hazir Yusuf Berisha is a Kosovo Albanian from the village of Ćuška near Peć in northern Kosovo. He is one of 3 survivors of the massacre of about 40 Albanian men committed by the Serb forces on 14 May 1999. He testified before the tribunal almost exactly 10 years later. After this second round, the second volley of fire, there was a brief pause. You could hear the cries of the men who had been shot. There were still people alive amongst them. Then I heard them fire 1 bullet at each of the men. They started from my left and continued up to 1 or 2 persons away from me, and then they stopped. I don't know why. Maybe they ran out of bullets. I survived this execution. In the other 2 houses, people suffered the same fate. They were all killed. Only one survived, Ilyas Kelmendi. In the house of Silgashi, Izagashi survived. It must have been God's will that in each of the 3 houses, 1 person survived. It was something horrible. The screams. I still dream them, you know, sometimes. I wake up with them, and then I go to sleep with them. They beat them as much as they could and as much as they wanted. I was beaten, fell down, but I got up too, because those who fell down, they would never go up again. And then he turned to us, Croats, and started talking to us. Listen, you fellas, we're going to kill all of you. We're going to burn you. We're going to throw your ashes into the Danube to destroy your Croat seed. I remember exactly that sentence, and I shall never forget it. Emil Čakalić was working as a sanitary inspector in Vukovar in eastern Croatia in 1991. After the city had fallen, he and his wife left his home to seek refuge in the Vukovar hospital. A few days later, Emil and the other detainees, more than 200 of them, were boarded onto buses and brought to the nearby farm, Ovčara, where they were executed. Emil was one of the 7 prisoners who survived. He testified before the tribunal 3 times. One man saved me. He remembered that I'd done him a favor before the war. Each of the 7 of us who were saved at Ovčara had a savior. I've heard that the man who saved me later was indicted. If I were in court, I would testify in such a way as to beg the court to forgive him.
I returned from here. I went out to walk around your city. I couldn't believe
Zatim je meni rekao, iskoraci 2 koraka. Ja sam ga poslušao, iskoracio sam. Sa lijeve strane mi je isto meni sa metra opalio metak. Metak mi je ovdje ušao, a ovdje izašao.
Ovo što se doživjelo, to je samo bilo između mene i ovih ubica koji su radili. Ako se to neko ne ispriča, ne bi se ni znalo da je to bilo uopšte. A ubistva su bila masovna.
I osjetila sam bol u nozi. Vidjela sam da mi je noga raznesena. Sama sudnica, priprema je bila vrlo konkretna, tako da se zove tužitelji, lijepo su nas pripremili, sve su rekli, sve su objasnili što će se dogoditi, znači nije bilo nikakvih iznenađenja u svemu tome. Ja u sudnicu nisam ulazila sa nekakvom prevelikom dozom emocija. Ja sam, kao što sam već prije rekla, ja sam smatrala da je to moja dužnost i da to treba napraviti i bez obzira šta ja osjećala ili ne u toj situaciji, tako da sam ja to jednostavno došla tamo i obavila.
Pored tijela sa odsječenom glavom, prvo su oborili mene na zemlju, pa zatim i doktora Šikanića. Jedan od mudžahedina koji su nas provodili je uzeo sjekiru, uz povike Allahu Ekber, udario je sjekirom neposredno ispred moje glave.
Nisam imao priliku, vjerujte mi, da se zahvalim svim ljudima koji rade u vezi sa Haškim tribunalom na korektnom odnosu u cijelom toku tog procesa. Znači, od prvog uzimanja izjava do svih onih prevođenja na engleski jezik pa ponovo na srpski jezik, do ovdje pripremanja vize, do puta, prijema, smještaja, odnosa u Haškom tribunalu, znači pratnje svega ostaloga što je bilo gore, apsolutno ni najmanju zamjerku nemam.
We've now reached the final part of our ceremony. I now invite to the stage Judge Kamel Ajuz, President of the ICTY, together with His Excellency, United Nations Secretary-General, Mr. Guterres, please. President Ajuz, Mr. Guterres. I now invite Judge Theodore Meron, President of the mechanism, to join us. Thank you. His Excellency, the Secretary-General, will now witness the handing over of a commemorative medallion from President Ajuz to President Meron, symbolising the transfer of the legacy of the ICTY. This officially concludes the ceremony. Thank you all for joining us on this historic occasion. I invite you to remain seated while His Majesty and certain other guests proceed to the reception rooms, and in a few moments you will be invited to join us for the reception there. So if you would just remain seated for a moment. Thank you all very much.